My name is Madeleine Miller, and I will be discussing the tragic case of Marilyn Sheppard's murder and the media-saturated trial that followed when her husband, Sam Sheppard, was accused of the crime. This case is a great example of a media trial and the consequences of having too much media involvement in the courts. On July 4, 1954, Marilyn Sheppard was bludgeoned to death in her Ohio home early in the morning and was found in her bedroom by Sam Sheppard. She was 4 months pregnant at the time. Beginning the next day, this case received massive-scale news coverage, and the story dominated both local and national news for several months. The stories published in news articles convicted Sheppard almost immediately, long before he was actually tried for the murder. They characterized Sheppard as a man with little morals and publicly examined every aspect of his life. When his affair with Susan Hayes was discovered, this served as a possible motive for Marilyn's death. Sheppard was tried for the murder of his wife. Initially, he was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. 10 years later, Sheppard's case was reviewed by the Supreme Court, which concluded that he had not received a fair trial. Following this decision, Sheppard then went through a second trial for the murder of his wife. The second trial of Sam Sheppard was conducted in 1966, 12 years after the first trial. Following the Supreme Court decision, media coverage was heavily restricted in order to ensure that this time around Sheppard received a fair trial. Sheppard was found not guilty by the second jury after spending a decade in prison. The Sheppard case is a clear representation of a sinful rich media trial. Sheppard was a well-respected doctor, and Marilyn Sheppard was a prominent socialite at the time of her death. The claims made by the prosecution and the media that Sheppard's affair was the motive for the murder also shows the voyeuristic aspect described by Surratt as a common part of this type of trial. So what exactly makes this case qualify as a media trial? First, there was a huge amount of press coverage both before and during the trial. One newspaper ran 399 stories about Sheppard in only 6 months. The press openly called for Sheppard to be charged, and unsubstantiated claims were published throughout the case. Here are some examples of newspaper headlines from the first 3 months after the murder took place. There was wild speculation about Sheppard's affair, even going so far as to claim that several other women were involved. One report claimed that both Sam and Marilyn were members of a, quote, gay set in the area, and that Marilyn had at one point described her husband as a Jekyll and Hyde. Second, Judge Blythen allowed the media free rein throughout the trial. This included the publication of the witnesses' addresses and published photos of all 12 jurors. In the courtroom, prominent seating was given to the press, and both radio and TV broadcasts were made from the courthouse. One columnist claimed that the judge had stated Sheppard was, quote, guilty as hell. Discretion was not required of either the media or the jurors involved in this trial. Jurors were allowed by the court to make phone calls to friends during deliberations, something that would never be allowed today. The jury was unable to avoid seeing sensational news coverage that could have biased them against Sheppard. It was so crowded with onlookers and members of the press that Sheppard couldn't even talk to his counsel without reporters overhearing. There were many reporters stationed directly next to the jury box as well, which likely affected their behavior and their level of focus during the trial. This picture illustrates how many people were in the courtroom for the duration of the case. The winning social construction of this event best fits the social breakdown frame, which posits that crime is the result of the breakdown of family and community, including the high rates of divorce. The media framed Sheppard as an unfaithful man and even claimed he was planning to divorce his wife before her death. His affair was pointed out as a possible motive for the murder. The Sheppard case is an excellent example of how a media trial, especially one as sensationalized as this, can pit the Sixth Amendment right to a fair trial against the First Amendment right to freedom of the press. As was discussed in lecture, cases like this can cause a significant amount of tension between criminal justice system actors and media outlets. Supreme Court cases that allowed for transferring cases and regulated gag orders did not come about until over a decade after Sheppard was convicted. Sheppard v. Maxwell, the case in which Sheppard was granted a second trial, held that cases should be continued or transferred in the case of prejudicial news. Nebraska Press v. Stewart laid out the requirements for issuing a gag order. Media has the capability to entirely control a narrative, whether that narrative is factual or not. News outlets can also create interest in a particular topic, further complicating the job of the court. In Sheppard's case, the media heavily influenced both his arrest and subsequent conviction. This is an example of a way in which media can have a direct effect on its audience. After viewing the many news stories about Sheppard, his infidelity, and speculations about his character and temperament, the jury could not conduct an unbiased analysis of the case. The Sheppard case best fits the organizational model of news media. As discussed in lecture, this model claims that media loses objectivity during the process of taking an actual event and making it into a marketable product, sometimes resulting in biased reporting. However, in this case, some of the information was not only biased, but fabricated. The deaths related to the Sheppard case were, unfortunately, not quite over with. Shortly after his conviction, Sheppard's mother committed suicide. A mere 11 days after her death, Sheppard's father passed away from stomach cancer, and years later, following Sheppard's retrial and acquittal, Marilyn's mother also committed suicide. After Sheppard was acquitted in his second murder trial, Marilyn's case was reopened. DNA evidence was reported to be inconclusive and no other suspects were found or questioned. This was one of the earliest media trials, and it led to a stricter attitude about reporters and press involvement in criminal trials. The mystery still remains as to who actually killed Marilyn Sheppard. The case is still circulating in the media, though it has moved from news media to entertainment media in the form of podcasts and true crime shows. All the information in these slides can be found at these websites, including the images. Thank you.